Hi, this is Mike from Mike's Unboxing Reviews and How To, and on today's video we'll be taking a look at a tiny little motherboard from Gigabyte. This is the B450i Aorus Pro WiFi. Keep watching to find out more. Okay, so in today's video we're taking a look at a really small board. This is the Gigabyte B450i Aorus Pro WiFi. A very long name, but a very small motherboard. So this is a ITX motherboard suitable for, well, ITX builds. So if you're looking at building one of those tiny little media center PCs, which is essentially what I'll be using this for, this is one of the perfect boards on the market right now. We're currently at the end of 2021. We are recording this in the end of November. And there's not a lot to choose from on the market these days. A lot of the ITX boards tend to be extremely expensive, and even some of the lower end boards, such as the newer A520 boards, do still command a price tag of at least £100 or more. And obviously they are somewhat limited in some of their features, overclocking, etc, etc. So when I saw this one on Amazon in their warehouse deals section, it was down from around about £150 down to about £100. I'll put some links in the video description. You may well be able to pick up a bargain for yourself in the Amazon used warehouse deals. I couldn't pass it up. I've actually got a build in mind for this. I've recently done some upgrades on my own systems and I've got another ITX build. So my previous B550 ITX board is going into another machine. So this is going to be a replacement. And I'm going to be pairing this with a very humble processor, but one which is actually relatively readily available at the moment on the UK market, which is the Ryzen 3 2200G. So we don't need a particularly massive amount of performance, but this board certainly can upgrade as well. It does actually take up to the Ryzen 9 5950X if you wanted to, although I think for a lot of people this is going to be perfectly suited to those more lower powered media center type machines, with also a little bit of an edge for gamers. Anyway, let's go through the box, take a look at the packaging, see what we actually get inside. We'll give you a tour of the board and then you can make your own mind whether this can be suitable for your next ITX build. One of the first things you notice about this with the packaging is actually how small the box is. It is an absolutely tiny box, but it is an absolutely tiny board. The board itself measures in at the ITX standard, which is 17 by 17 centimeters, so it is particularly small. On the box you can see we've got the specs here. Some of the specs were actually on the box, which are slightly different from what you're seeing right now. There were stickers on there to confirm that it is Ryzen 3000 series ready, although this box, because it was from an Amazon deal, as you can see, it's a little bit beat up. I've done my best to try and remove most of the stickers and things which were covering up stuff. And sadly, the Ryzen 3000 sticker was one of those things that did not survive the cleanup process. So specifications actually on the box itself. So yeah, Ryzen Desktop 2000 series ready, so it gives you some idea of the age of this board. I think this board actually originally released somewhere towards the tail end of 2017, early 2018. So yeah, we have moved on a few years, but still, this is a really good spec board. It is the B450 chipset, which is pretty much tried and tested these days, and even if you do want to use newer AMD AM4 processors, it isn't a problem. The B450 chipset still does cut the mustard in modern times. Specification wise on the bottom, so we've got 4+2 VRM setup. We've also got gaming VB audio, which is based on the ALC 1220 VB chipset. We've also got some RGB FUSION thrown into the mix, and also we've got Gigabyte's Smart Fan 5. On the back of the box it goes into some more of those details again. So we've got the 4+2 IR Digital PWM design, we've got the immersive gaming VB audio chipset, we've got the Wi-Fi Wave 2, RGB FUSION, fan stop, cFos, the Nichicon caps actually on the audio chipset, and other details there. I'll give you a close-up also of the chipset and the details so you can get a better idea of what is actually on the board. Something else slightly unusual about this particular setup is actually the box, weirdly enough. It's probably the first time I've ever seen a box which actually folds open in this particular way. It's kind of folded in on itself. It just, yeah, seems a little bit unusual. Maybe it's just me. So first of all, when we look inside, we get the motherboard itself, which we'll put to the side, and we'll take a look at that in more depth later. Inside the box itself, for accessories, I'm actually pleased to see that even though this was one of those Amazon warehouse deals, it does appear that we've got the full set of components in here. So starting off, first of all, we've got the Wi-Fi antenna setup. So this is using SMA type connectors, which screw onto the back of the motherboard, and then you've got an antenna there and a reasonably long cable. You also get a pair of SATA connections. There are some M.2 screws, a AORUS sticker with some 3M adhesive, a really nice backplate. Although this board doesn't have a kind of captive or built-in I/O shield, you do get one included with a nicely blacked out back piece, and also it's got that really nice padding on the back as well, which doesn't really do a great deal, but adds a sense of premium quality to it. Also included, there is a driver DVD for those of you that are still using optical drives. There's some stuff in French. There's the multilingual installation guide. And last of all, we've got our user manual, which tells you about pretty much most of the board and goes into some depth, although you will find that because of obviously this is a revision 1 board and it is a B450 chipset and it is 3 or 4 years old now, some of the specifications have actually been updated, and with the latest BIOS edition there are some changes from what is actually listed in the manual, although if you go over to the website, which I'll link in the video description, you can see all of the details there in their current status. So let's take a look at the board itself, and as you can see, this thing is absolutely tiny, but it's actually still quite weighty. There's plenty of heat sinks on here. We've got this really big heat sink on here for the VRM, which is only a 4+2 setup, so we're not going to get overly excited, and obviously there are going to be some limitations. I wouldn't suggest getting a 5950X and overclocking the hell out of it, because simply this VRM will not take it. But for most systems with a 4, 6 or 8 core processor, you should be absolutely fine. Just obviously do make sure there's a little bit of airflow if you are going for those higher end processors. Looking at connectivity on the top here, so we've got an 8-pin EPS connection, which does give you some idea of the kind of power limitations of the board. Obviously it isn't a 8+4, but it's better than having just a single 4, so there are going to be some benefits of that for power delivery. Next up, there is the CPU fan header, which is in a slightly unusual place. I think you'll find being really stretched over to this point. Normally they're kind of somewhere over here. So yeah, it was slightly unusual there. I thought originally it was a chassis fan header, but sadly, no, it is the CPU connection at the top there. Again, that is a hybrid fan header, so it will support things like 3-pin fans, 4-pin fans, PWM, water pumps, etc, etc, all of which are configurable in the BIOS, and also it does support that zero fan technology. So if the thermal limits are met or not reached, then the fan can actually spin down to 0 RPM without causing the motherboard to go crazy and say one of your fans has stopped. So moving down a little bit, we've got our VRM section here and the chokes, etc. Again, 4+2 setup there. Then we've got our AM4 socket. Now, when it comes to processor support, this actually does support a very, very wide range of processors. Pretty much everything from the Athlon kind of 200 GEs all the way up to, like we said, the 5950X should you wish to, and pretty much everything in between. I have looked through the list, and again, I'll put links in the video description, so if you're not sure what processor this will support, please do check the lists and they will be updated, obviously, when Gigabyte update BIOSes, etc, etc. Moving across, we've got 2 RAM slots. Now, originally this board only supported 32 gigs of RAM. Currently, in its latest variation with the latest BIOS, it will support up to 64 gigs of RAM. And also they've increased the memory as well, the speed-wise, so this will support up to DDR4 3600 in an OC mode, and potentially you could get it up there further than that if you wanted to, but that is what they're saying. Basically 3600 is kind of like the upper limit of what this board should support, which is pretty much where you should be with B450 chipset. Generally, you're kind of looking somewhere in the 3200 to 3466 range. So it's nice to see that this actually does officially support 3600 straight out of the box, or at least it should do now if you're buying one. Moving across, we've got our 24-pin power connector in pretty much the normal place. Moving down from that, there is a 4-pin speaker connection, and next to that we've got our front I/O, so things like your reset button, power button, etc, etc, all of which are nicely color coded as well, which makes it a little bit easier, although because where they're situated is a little bit tricky to get to them, there isn't a great deal of room around them because they are sandwiched in next to those 4 SATA ports. So we do have 4 SATA ports, all of which support SATA 3 or 6 gigabit per second transfers, so you can use those if you want to. Also supports RAID 0, RAID 1 and RAID 10. Moving down from that, we've got our USB connectivity, so USB 2.0 and also USB 3.0. These are all controlled by the chipset, so for your front panel audio. And then moving down further from that, there is the other fan header. And yes, I did say the other fan header. There are only 2 fan headers on this particular board, so for those of you who are wondering, yes, 2 fan headers, which isn't particularly great. But again, if you're using this in one of those smaller ITX form factor builds, generally you'll find there isn't a great deal of room for fans unless you're going for a slightly larger case. Some of the Cooler Masters like the NR200 where you can add more fans. Obviously if you do need to do that, you can get a simple splitter or a hub, but for most people I think that's going to be absolutely fine. Again, that fan header will support hybrid modes, so 3-pin, 4-pin PWM, and also use the zero fan technology as well for 0 RPM. So moving across, we've got our M.2 slot, which is covered with this really nice armor on there. Nice and easy to remove, just a single screw on there. There's a thermal pad on there as well to transfer heat from your M.2 drives. You can use either type of M.2 drive, so if you want to use an NVMe drive, you can do. PCI Express Gen 3x4 is the maximum supported. or alternatively you can use a SATA M.2 drive if you want to. Either is absolutely fine. Size-wise, you are limited to 2280 size drives, which are pretty much the norm these days, and obviously as drives are getting more and more compact, it will take the smaller drives as well should you need to. Just next to the actual M.2 slot, tucked in right next to the memory, there is a 4-pin DC 12 volt header for RGB, just RGB, not addressable RGB. So if you're using something like one of those AMD stock coolers, we've got the RGB ring on it, then you can plug that into there, that's absolutely fine, or other RGB strips should you wish to. And underneath that there is the PCI Express graphics card slot, so that is PCI Express Gen 3 x 16, fully wired, and also you've got this really nice armor on there to support graphics cards which are slightly heavier, although again, I think most people probably looking at this board, I think there's going to be a tendency to go with an APU, so that may be kind of redundant really. Moving along at the bottom, so we've got our Nichicon caps for the audio, which is again ALC 1220VB, which is the kind of enhanced version of the 1220 chipset. And there's an absolute ton of connectors down in this bottom area, so we'll go through those. You've got your HD audio connection, which is the traditional kind of 9-pin setup there. Next to that, there is a TPM header, so if you want to use an additional TPM header, you can do. Most people I think will probably use a TPM built into the processors on most AMD processors these days, but you can actually get a Gigabyte specific TPM header to go onto that if you wanted to. Next to that, we've got another audio connector, which looks very much like a 3-pin 5-volt addressable RGB connector, but it isn't. It is actually for your SpeedIF connection, so for audio lovers out there, you can connect to a SpeedIF header. Moving up from that, there is the Cmos Reset, which is a 2-pin. Above that, confusingly, is another one, which is marked CI, which is Chassis Intrusion. And then moving up above that, we've got an addressable RGB header, so that is going to be for your 5-volt, 3-pin addressable RGB. So that's pretty much it for items actually on the board itself. Let's take a look at the I/O. So on the back of the I/O, we've got something which is actually slightly unusual, and I don't think I've seen on any other boards of recent times. You've actually got 3 outputs. Although it's not unusual to see 3 outputs, but in this particular configuration we've got 2 HDMI ports, which are HDMI 2.0, and also there's a DisplayPort 2.1. So both of those are going to support kind of 4K resolutions up to 60 Hz. Depending on the processor or APU you're using on the board, that may limit what you can actually output on here. So do bear that in mind. Obviously, do check with Gigabyte's website for your specific processor and what the outputs are going to give you. I think for most people, 2 outputs are going to be absolutely fine, which should work with most of the APUs on the market. So moving over to the USBs, so we've got 4 USBs which are color-coded blue. Now these are actually coming all from the actual processor itself, so these are going to be USB 3, this is going to be 3.1 Gen 1 ports. Next we've got the color-coded ones, which are color-coded red. These are actually coming from the chipset itself, so these are the faster ones. These are going to be the USB 3, 3.1 Gen 2, so faster ports there, so Gen 2 and Gen 1 ports there. Moving across, we've got our Intel LAN. So this is Intel Gigabit LAN, which is always nice to see. A slight upgrade from Realtek, some would argue. And also we've got the Intel wireless as well. So this is dual band, so supports 2.4 GHz and 5 GHz. And again, we've got the antennas included, so you can screw those onto there. If you don't like the antennas, which are the kind of screw-on ones, which have got a cable, you can, if you want to, just buy SMA type connectors and put those on if you want to. It is an extra cost, but some people may prefer that. Again, down to the individual. And then last up, we've got our 3 audio ports. Now this does support 7.1 audio, but if you do want to use 7.1 audio, as with most things, if you want to use analog jacks, you are going to have to reroute your front audio, so your 2 front panel connectors, and combine those in the software. Alternatively, obviously, you can just digitally send 7.1 through the HDMI or display ports, or you can use the SpeedIF connector on the motherboard. On the back of the board, nothing sadly here. I was hoping that there would be an additional M.2 slot to make it a possibility of having 2 M.2 drives in there rather than just the one, but yeah, that isn't to be the case on this particular board. So yeah, not much to speak of. Obviously you've got your AMD backplate, standard mounting mechanism for AM4 coolers, all that kind of stuff. I think that's pretty much it. That is the board pretty much covered. The reason why I bought this is mostly for compatibility. Now, most of you are probably out there thinking, why have you bought a B450 ITX board, which is actually pretty expensive in terms of what motherboards are. But at the moment, trying to get hold of processors, there are not really a great deal of options. A lot of the kind of 3000 series processors, like the 3400G, extremely expensive, almost double what they should be normally. Same goes for things like the Ryzen 5 5600G, is a particularly expensive processor, around about the sort of 230 to 250 pounds mark here in the UK. So if you're just building a smallish media center PC with a little bit of gaming on the side, something like the Ryzen 3 2200G or the 2400G are a much better option. But a lot of motherboards, especially ITX ones and especially ones on the B550 or A520 chipsets, just lack compatibility and have all kinds of weird stuff going on where either M.2 slots don't work or USBs don't work or just general instability. So rather than go down that route, my suggestion would be, if you want to build a smaller media center PC, you don't want to spend an absolute fortune, look out for something like this, and look out for something like, again, the Ryzen 3 2200G, the Ryzen 5 2400G, and you can get yourself a really nice little system which can do a little bit of gaming as well for not a great deal of money. So anyway, that's going to wrap this one up. Let me know what you think about this one in the comments section below. If you've got any other things that you need to know about this board, feel free to reach out in the comments or join us on our Discord chat server. But for now, I've been Mike. This is Mike's Unboxing Reviews and How To, and hopefully we'll catch you in the very next video. Thanks for watching.